How do you handle multiple projects? That's what we're talking about today. Hi, this is Frank Buck, and this is the place to be if you want to get organized and make it look easy. I have a question for you. How many projects do you have on your plate right now? And how quickly could you produce a list of them? To take it a step further, where are you on each one of those projects? Now, if it would take you more than about 10 seconds to give me all of that information, well, then stick around because we've got something for you. The material it follows was composed for people enrolled in a book study on the book Get Organized Time Management for School Leaders. Chapter 5 is entitled Handling Multiple Projects. Now, you don't have to be in the school business to have multiple projects. We all have them. And in the book, in chapter 5, and in the video that you're going to see, you'll see how I handle those, how I stay on top of how many projects I have and exactly where I am on each one. And if you want to be able to keep all the balls in the air, stick around. The video's for you. Enjoy. How many times have you heard the suggestion, break big projects down into little steps? Has anybody shown you a system for actually doing that so that nothing falls through the cracks? Well, that's what chapter 5 is all about. You and I talk about how many things that we're juggling, and in many ways, we are jugglers. And the image on the cover of the book was carefully chosen. How does the juggler keep all the balls in the air? Well, that juggler knows how many balls there are, knows the position of each one, and gives each ball the right amount of attention at the right time. Well, if you or I were to go to a juggler and to learn the trade, that juggler would probably start us off with one ball. That's exactly what we're going to do today. How do you handle one project? And then you apply the process to all other projects. So here's a common situation. An upset parent telephones the central office about something that a teacher has said or done. And from the parent's call, the nature is pretty serious. So the assistant superintendent who fields the call is documenting this probably in their paper journal that they learned about in chapter 4. Now, if this was something small, the assistant superintendent might simply suggest the parent contact the teacher, and then if they didn't receive satisfaction, then go to the principal, et cetera, before bringing it back to the central office. But in this case, let's say the assistant superintendent wants to stay involved, and putting this situation to bed is going to require a few steps. So the assistant superintendent adds to the digital task list the following: XX, Johnny Joan incident has been resolved. The assistant superintendent starts with a goal that this incident has been resolved, whatever resolved means. We want to start with our definition of what done looks like. Admittedly, this one is a little hazy, but at some point in the future, when the assistant superintendent looks at this item on the list, he or she will say, yes, this has been handled. I can check this off. The Johnny Jones thing is just fine. So with any project, we need to know our definition of done. And secondly, we need to know the next step for us. Now, in this case, the assistant superintendent picks up the phone and calls the principal. They agree that the next step for the principal will be to talk to the teacher, and then the principal will keep the assistant superintendent updated. When they hang up the phone, what happens to that task? Has the definition of done been met? Of course not. The goal wasn't to make a phone call and check it off. The goal was to have this situation handled. What's the next step for the assistant superintendent? In this case, it's expecting to receive an update from the principal. So to the left of the XX, the assistant superintendent keys in the principal's name, the letters ETR standing for expect to receive, and changes the date on the task for when he or she would like to see that task again. Maybe this date will be tomorrow or maybe the next day. If the assistant superintendent hasn't heard anything back by then, seeing that task on the list is the reminder for the assistant superintendent to follow up. Likewise, the principal has something on the task list. What's on the right-hand side of the XX is going to be the same as what the assistant superintendent had, that this situation involving Johnny Jones has been solved. What's the next step for the principal? What's on the left-hand side of the XX? It's going to be talking to the teacher. Teacher's planning time is an hour from now, and the principal wants to speak to the teacher then. So having that to the left of the two X's, when the principal looks at the list a little later, you're going to see that and be able to go and have that conversation with the teacher. They agree that the teacher will contact the parent and keep the principal informed. So after talking to the teacher, does the principal check this task off as done? Oh, that definition of done has not been met. What's the next step for the principal? If you answered putting the name of the teacher and the letters ETR on the left of the XX, you're right. The teacher can't make that phone call right now, but if the teacher's organized, a new task has just been added to the list. We know there are going to be at least two steps, right? Call the parent, report back to the principal. So for me, that's enough to create a project. Call Mrs. Jones, and the phone number that goes on the left-hand side of the XX. And Johnny Jones incident has been resolved goes on the right-hand side of the XX. The teacher places the phone call, and the teacher has that journal there to document that phone call. After the phone call's over, the teacher can highlight and delete what's on the left. That phone call has been made. But has the definition of done been met? No. Regardless of how well or poorly the phone call went, the teacher needs to let the principal know. That's what we're going to put on the left-hand side of the XX. We're not going to just try and remember to get back with the principal, because lots happens during the day. Our list is going to have everything we need to do. Now, are there other next steps for the teacher? If so, putting those in the description or note section of that task is going to hold those. Nothing needs to stay in the teacher's head where he or she just hopes they'll see it and remember it at the right time. The teacher probably now goes to the principal. Turns out to be a misunderstanding, and the parent had thanked the teacher for calling and straightening the whole thing out. The principal's delighted. The teacher checks that task off as done. But the principal hasn't quite bought into the idea that things need to be written down immediately. Yes, the principal needs to call the assistant superintendent, but that's so easy to remember. Who could forget it? But the day gets busy, and the next day's busy. And you know what? That one just slipped through the cracks. Principal totally forgot about it. But the assistant superintendent didn't, because on the list, on the appointed day, there it is, the principal's name, ETR, two X's, and the Johnny Jones situation, whatever. There's the trigger for the assistant superintendent who's not heard back from the principal to pick up the phone and say, hey, could you update me on Johnny Jones? Hadn't heard anything back yet. That's the kind of thing that keeps things from falling through the cracks. Now, if you don't have a good system for follow-up, and to be honest, most people don't, some of us are really good at doing the things we need to do, but in the positions that we hold now, so much of our work is done by other people. We delegate things to other people. How are we going to keep up with whether or not people have followed through with their deliverables? So this little idea of having that ETR, having that next step as me being waiting on something, expecting to receive something from that other person is going to keep a lot of things from falling through the cracks. Now, suppose that phone call from the teacher to the parent had not gone well. There might be a few more steps along the way, and there might even be a phone call to the board attorney. If everyone along the way simply had their journal open during the phone calls or meetings, then the documentation is there and it's easy to retrieve. At each step along the way, each person knows the next step for him or her. This includes when the next step is simply waiting to hear from someone else. That next step has a date. So I schedule it for when I want to see that task again. In the notes section of the task, I can put any related information I want, such as a link to an email message or the date that I documented something in my journal. Now, this is one project. You probably have many things on your list that require more than one step. No problem. Define the goal. What is your definition of done? That's what goes on the right-hand side of the XX. What's your next step toward completion? That goes on the left-hand side of the XX. And when do you want to see this task again? Give it a due date. Do the same with every project and nothing falls through the cracks. Now, I have a question for you. If your boss walked in the door right now and asked, what's on your plate? What projects do you have now? How long would it take for you to produce a list? Answer that question for yourself. Let's just take a moment. If your answer was something like, oh, probably 10 seconds, congratulations. If you're saying 10 seconds, how can you produce that list in 10 seconds? That would probably take me hours. Then chapter 5 is going to really be the thing that changes the game for you. On your digital task list, in the search window, type 2X's and hit enter. You've just produced a list of every project you have together with the next step toward completion. Because after all, every one of those goals or projects is going to have that little XX that separates the next action from what done looks like. You'll instantly be able to tell your boss what projects you're working on. You'll instantly be able to tell your boss what's the next step toward completing every one of them. You're going to be one of those people who's organized and makes it look easy. Well, what do you think? Can you see how you can keep track of every project and have the next step toward its completion and have it all in one place? If you don't have a copy of this book, come over to the companion blog post. I'll have a link for you there of how to order it. Thanks for stopping by. And if you like this content, there's plenty more that's just as nuts and bolts. This has been Frank Buck, helping you get organized and make it look easy.